So, can you raise your hand if you actually saw my TED Talk? So some of you have? Okay. The rest of you haven't suffered through it yet. Now, the reason that I say suffer is because it's very much what we're going to talk about today. That was an awful experience for me. Why was it? In TED, they have a specific type of format. I don't have a red dot up here, and you'll see this in every TED Talk. You can't leave the red dot. Not only can you not leave the red dot, but you're not supposed to move. I'm a kinesthetic person, and I'm spatial, so that's almost like being in a prison for me. 2, you must memorize it verbatim, every word for word, which amounted to 186 times that I had to practice it, those 13 minutes, for across 10 months. So that's 40 hours of constant rehearsal if you would do it all at once. It was excruciating, but that's not the hardest point. The hardest point was the punishment. If you do not complete your talk within your allotted time, for me it was 13 minutes, they will physically take you off the stage on live television in front of a live audience, which happened to be my hometown. So my first question is, who's going to be pulling me off the stage? Because I'm thinking if I just strangle them, then they'll be asleep for a while and they won't be able to extract me. So those 3 issues are what compounded all of the visible struggle that I had while I was giving the talk. There were a lot of emotional issues that I had to cover because I had to unpack not just my learning difficulties, but the environment in which I was forced to learn, and then a lot of abuse at home. We had a PTSD family that was war-related, and because of the violence, the alcoholism, the shame, and the self-hatred, it was really difficult to extract what was going on with my learning from all of that confusing stuff. It took quite a bit of time. So, you see lots of stuff up here. These are all my accommodations. I won't be reading off my script, but I have everything memorized in a grid. So every slide, every point that I'm trying to make is organized here, and I place that inside my matrix. And all I have to do is a quick reference. And I have plenty of other accommodations up here. The time compression, I get 50 minutes, not 13. Whew. Same presentation, just a lot less perspiration. So, over the course of giving this talk in different countries, I've noticed that people have become just as interested in the format in which I give the talk as they are in the content. Because it's all of these accommodations that lets a dyslexic become a public speaker and an author and an inventor. All of these things are my outsourced brain. It's how I think. And when they're in place, everything is smooth, especially when the bathroom is very close. I want to start with an experiment to show how this relates. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like, on this side of the audience, if you could take your right hand and place it on the shoulder of the person next to you. And on this side of the audience, I want you to take your left hand and place it on the shoulder of the person next to you. Perfect. See, I have to work it out too. Now, those of you in the middle, cut down here through the corpus callosum, you're going to hang out for a second, and I need, where's Caleb? Hiding in the back. So I don't need those yet, but I need your body. So if Caleb comes up here and helps me, and what was your name again, ma'am? Connie. Connie and Joshua are going to reach their hands out in towards the middle. Caleb's going to join them together, but not yet, just a second. Before he joins them together, Caleb's going to help me out by grabbing their hands. In physics, this is called the event horizon. Once we do this, there's no going back. It's a seizure of genius, a grand mal of innovation. It's the dyslexic moment that we feel as an affliction of an idea. So if you grab hands, great. Now, this is a distant connection. That's what we're going to talk about today. Each one of you, we're off. Each one of you represent, can we pull the slide up? I'm sorry. Keep holding hands. You got to hold. No excuse, you have to hold hands. So each one of you, perfect, represent a micro column of information, of knowledge. And that's how our brain's organized. We don't memorize things in folders, I wish. Then I could just rifle through it and find the right word. You're going to find out that when I talk, it looks like Captain Kirk up here struggling with the very dramatic language. Because I'm trying to rifle through and find the right word. This represents the distant connection that we throw our ideas across. So now this right hemisphere, left hemisphere, is connected all the way to the far side of the room. And we throw those ideas way over there. Whereas normal education, okay, everybody can put their hands down for a second. I know that was tiring, thank you. Normal education, I'm going to, can I borrow you for a second, Joshua? I'm going to wrap you up. Yeah, I didn't tell you I was going to do this part. So come on up here. Can you hold this for me? Stand right here. I'll make you go into the TED dot. And can you spin that way? The other way. There you go. Keep spinning. Keep spinning. Now, I'm going to ask Joshua to read a sonnet. And he's going to read it word for word. And when he gets it wrong, we're going to make him do it again. And then we're going to show him everything that he did wrong. And we're going to tell him he's a bad person. Okay. Now, this is very much not a distant connection. As he tries to do the same thing over and over and over again, he's not the slow learner, the teacher is. Because the same thing is not producing different results. So that's actually the definition of insanity, trying the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. He feels very restricted because those dendrites, the little connections, can't receive any new information. The axon that Caleb became connecting both hemispheres of the brain is broken because of shame. And let's add into it a little violence. So we tell Joshua, no, you're a bad person, I'm going to paddle you. Now we add in all of that stuff, and that severs the connection and actually creates a neural scar. It's almost impossible to get that new connection again. So not only can he not move as a spatial and kinesthetic, but he can't memorize those words in that format. This is rough. Do you feel bound? I can drink some more. Just say yes. Okay. Okay, you can hold on to that. Thank you, Joshua. Be careful stepping down. It's more like a plastic bag. If you pull a plastic bag, it stays that length after you hold it for a little bit. That's very much the perspective that we have to shift. We have to realize that by the end of this talk, it's impossible to go back. We've passed the event horizon. From the same perspective, the same thing looks two different ways. So there could be a lot of space in between those distant connections. You could look at it in that way, that there's a vacuum. And I was just kidding with Janine, I get lost in my own city. It frustrates my wife. But from the same perspective, if I physically walk out the grid of where I need to go, I have everything memorized. And I can't get lost. I can't give you directions, just like I can't tell right or left. Put your right hand back, left hand over. I had to memorize that, and I still gummed it up. The great thing about dyslexia is that once we understand the field, the perceptual field, we detect errors, and this is statistically proven, we detect errors faster than non-dyslexics. We can look at this image and instantly say, our heads cocked to the side, wait a minute, that waterfall is running backwards. How can that be possible? Where it takes a non-dyslexic a few extra seconds to a few fractions of seconds longer in order to see what the impossibility is. So we problem solve really quickly. But it's not that scientific part of our brain that's really interesting. It's not. And it's really cool because we come up later in life with really amazing innovations, inventions. That's not the coolest part for me. For me, it's the fact that we see possibility where others don't. So when you take a dyslexic and you look at this, the dyslexic sees the face and wonders, how is the face built of all of those things? Where a non-dyslexic looks at it, sees all the detail, and has to zoom out and see, oh, there's a face shape there. So you can, in school, my nickname was Dazer. I would often look at the teacher because I saw shapes moving, and I completely missed the lesson. But I was learning something else, where I'd stare out the window and I'd be interested in the flock changes in the birds and wonder it looks like the center bird is the one that's determining which direction. I'm off. I'm gone. So I'm seeing possibility, but just not the possibility the teacher wants. And that was part of a major problem for me. Up until second grade, I was writing mirror writing. So my name was Tox No-Nos. It wasn't Scott Sonnon. Now, you have to work with me. For the non-dyslexics, they're like, Tox No-Nos, I don't get it. So it's that language issue that caused me so many difficulties in speaking, reading, and writing. And I thought it was just weird until a teacher, Mrs. Peterman, and I still remember her, and I still remember what she looks like. She was giant. She was like 7 feet tall. I was in this tiny little desk, and she walked up next to me, and she said, Scott, can we try something? I'm like, anything. And she took the pencil out of my right hand because we were all forced to write right-handed back then. The left hand was considered bad, evil, sinistra. It was the sinister hand. And she said, okay, just try this in your left hand. And I'm like, we get hit with our rulers for writing in our left hands. Just try it. So I put it in my left hand, and I wrote it, and my name came out, Scott Sonnon. And I'm like, that looks like what you have. She said, try something else. I'm like, anything. She said, and she pulled out another pencil, and she put it in my right hand. She goes, do both at the same time. And I did. One Scott Sonnon, one Tox No-Nos. All the kids, they wanted to see this trick. Like, that's so cool. How do you do that? I don't know. So they all ran back to their desks, and they go into their left hand, and then they just start to draw these awful shapes backwards. I'm like, been there. So they wanted to know how this trick was happening. And Mrs. Peterman, she just leaned down and she whispered in my ear, she goes, that must be your first superpower. Now, for many of you, you might think the superpower was the thing. For me, it was the first. What do you mean? What else is going on? Because that it imprinted me with an ambition and a hope that there was something else going on. It didn't really latch in for many years. So for those of you that are teachers and parents and advocates, don't think that we don't hear. We've got a lot of stuff going on, and it's going to take us a while to work on it. So you just have to be patient with us like you are and realize it's going in. It's just a very deeply planted seed. I didn't see things like most kids. I saw things a little off. I was a dazer, and I would stare at things and look at the possibility. But I still felt like an alien. Now, kids can be awful to other kids. My brother, they have a natural oil and vinegar relationship. And it's not that they're bad for what they do. They're just being kids. They're exploring social relationships. So my brother, being 7 years older than me, and me being in his things all the time, whenever I would touch him, he would look at me and just rub it off. And it used to infuriate me, but he did it so much that after a couple years, he did it unconsciously. So every time I'd bump into him, he wouldn't even think about it. He'd just rub, and I felt dirty, like unclean. That wouldn't bother most kids. I'm like, well, I'd touch him more, really make him clean off. But for me, it had a reverse action. I thought, well, if I feel like an alien, maybe there is something wrong with me. So it was just because of my situation that became something that was not healthy. even though it's just natural for kids to act like idiots sometimes. So that's what we do, just like adults. We don't do things we're trying to figure things out. It takes us some time. And as grown-ups, we're no different. We say things that we regret, right? We all do. And it's the awareness that changes things. And kids need time. We all make those mistakes. The teachers were no different. Back then, this is like 30 years ago. I read, wrote, and spoke 400 to 2,000 times slower than the typical student. 400 to 2,000 times slower. So of course they thought there was something wrong with me. That was their reality, right? That's what they saw. It was just their perspective. There's nothing wrong with what they did to me. They did the best that they could, except for the one that tried to hit me. Those teachers, it's something that they learn, but there should have been some common sense in there that the kid's not going to receive physical punishment for not getting something correct. We don't realize until recently that that's actually brain damage, even if it's a different body part. It changes our nervous structure when we're hit. I know, I got hit for a living for 20 years. It wasn't until I was in Russia studying with their special operations teams that I learned about something called Hick's law. And Hick's law means that the greater your number of options, the slower it is for you to pick the right one. Why was I 400 to 2,000 times slower? Well, if you go back to that earlier slide where I had two different perspectives, I wasn't slower. I had more options. If you look at this, now some of you have seen this before. The word cat is up there somewhere. Now this is just backwards and upside down. And it's not that dyslexics were looking at this and trying to figure out which is the right one. It's not a conscious process. Our brain is going through a selection process at a very rapid speed. We're trying to figure out where is the word cat. And when we try and write it, all of these options can come down. I want you to read this. Go, 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 go. As fast as you can. Start. Go, go, go. Dyslexics, hang out. You don't need to read this. We've done this. We know this. So I'm going to give them, they're still struggling, dyslexics. But it's getting faster for them. They're almost at the end. They're doing better. Almost there. Okay. Now we're down at the last word. Now, what's interesting about this slide is that the brain doesn't need the letters to be in the right sequence. Your brain doesn't need the letters to be in the right order. It's not important to your brain. Okay. Next one. Ready? Dyslexics. Relax. Go. Din, 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 din. See, we should put a time limit and a horn. And you should complete it within the allotted time. This was actually a study at Cambridge. Okay, you're done. You don't get to read the rest. I heard the last word. What's interesting about this slide is your brain doesn't care what the shape of the letters are. It extracts the gist. And this is very much what it's like to be a dyslexic. At first, you had that the forehead, you're trying to shove your forebrain closer to the screen. Trying to get the brain to go on. But by the end, did you feel how it smoothed out? You're thickening the sheath around those nerve cells by the end. There's an adaptation process that happens. But dyslexics, we have to go through this all the time. We know what your suffrage is like. We're there with you. It happens because of scaffolding of brain cells on a part of your brain called the hypothalamus. On dyslexics, there are more of those grid cells than on non-dyslexics. So what does that mean? Well, we look at two-dimensional language, and our brain instantly sucks it in and turns it into 3D, like this. So I asked my son, he's my first dyslexic, excuse me. I asked my son, here, put this in the light. I took him to a craft shop, and I said, I want you to take whatever you find in here and make it look like a letter that's floating in your brain. He's like, right, Dad, okay, check. And off he goes. He comes back with his big shopping cart full. I'm like, no, less than $20. So he designs this. And this is very much like the selection process for our brain for the letter C. If you can see this, because he put electrical tape all around it so it was color-coded. He wanted it to be one color so it didn't distract you for your non-dyslexics. So you can see the C forwards, backwards, the top, the back, the sides, but that's not the real selection trap. 400 to 2,000 times. This is what your brain sees. It sees the oscillation. It sees the wiggle of the letter. It's pulled it in and interprets it in 3 dimensions. That's why it's so slow for us, because we see so many more options than most people. For a chair, that's no problem. If I look at a blueprint as an architect, which is why there are so many architects that are dyslexic. Frank Lloyd Wright, some of the most amazing architecture you'd ever see. He looked into a blueprint and he could see the structure and where there were potential faults and where he could enhance the overhangs and create these wonderful cantilevers. For a chair, no problem. But you take a letter that has meaning and you put it into the same grid, and this is only the meaningful options that would happen if you put a letter in that grid. Can you imagine if it starts to wiggle? We don't see wiggles. We don't see, there's not a story going on, a storyboard of cartoons on it. It's the speed of delay that happens when we have to interpret what you want us to see. It takes a little bit longer. My son and I, we were exercising this summer, and he comes out in the morning and he said, Dad, can I exercise with you? I'm like, you're here, sure. So he said, what are we going to do? I said, okay, we'll do 15 repetitions of this exercise. You do 15 repetitions of this. We'll do it in 30 seconds. Ready? Sure. So we start. And at the end, you have 30 seconds and we're relaxing, we're shaking off. Okay, good job. And he looks at me and crosses his arms. He goes, I thought you said to do 15 repetitions. I said, yes, I want you to do 15 of these push-ups and then we're going to do 15. He goes, why'd you do 20? I looked at him, I'm like, a little rugrat. How many repetitions did you do? He said, 15. How do you know you did 15 and I did more? I said, why, I counted you. Did you count yourself? Yes. Okay, now I'm getting excited here because he's potentially very dyslexic. So, did you count your repetition and then look over and you count my repetition and go back and do your repetition? I said, no, that sounds really difficult. It is. I don't know how people do that. Because most people have difficulty counting their own repetitions, much less somebody else's. I said, well, how did you count them? He said, well, I saw it like a soccer scoreboard. Whereas I was doing mine, you were doing yours, but yours were faster. Oh, son, you don't know how big your brain is. Like this is a really critical skill because we can put numbers into grids too. And for me, as a teacher, sometimes I have 800 students in the audience, and I can see the different variation in technique, in volume of repetitions. I can see the change in their heart rate. I mean, all of that goes in, I plug it into the matrix. It's become a very useful school as a professional coach. But it's a dyslexic accommodation. We put things into categories. We block them out so that we have things in the right place. Don't mess with our things. The first time that I recognized this, it wasn't a, this is wonderful. It was in an inbound fist. I had walked into school, and I have big problems with my eyes. I walked into school, and I had just had drops in the morning, and they make your pupils go, whoosh. So all of the sunlight hurt. It was photosensitive. And I wore sunglasses to school. Not a good idea. The senior came up to me, slapped the glasses off my face, and he shoved me up against the locker. And suddenly, all the sunlight rushes in, and I'm completely blind, so I put my arms out, and I shove them away. I'm like, leave me alone. He hit me 2 times in the face so fast that I didn't even feel the pain. Sometimes when you get hit, the nerve transmission takes a delay, which was great, because I thought, this didn't hurt, and then it did. But what was interesting was what happened after. He grabbed a hold of me, and everything started to slow down. And the next fist came in like it was moving through molasses, and I cocked my head at it like a dazer does, and I moved out of the way. I'm like, well, if it's going to go that slow, and I just watched it hit the wall behind me, and then I got really excited, because I thought, this is going to help me a lot. It didn't. It didn't. I wasn't able to use it to defend myself yet. But what I did know is that he saw my face like this asterisk. He saw it in 2 dimensions. He saw the target, and he was trying to move at the target. But the dyslexics in the audience are staring at this right now, and they're cocking their heads, and they're seeing the bars start to shift. It's becoming a 3-dimensional jack, the toys that we played with when we were kids. Because of those grid cells, they take this asterisk, and we suck it into the grid cell, and we start to make it into 3D, and we're trying to sit here and pretend that it's an asterisk. Yeah, I see just what you see. Because we don't want you to think that we're strange, but we see things you don't. And that's what's cool. Because for him, he was trying to hit the asterisk. Stone, can you bring me that big sphere, please? This is called a Hoberman sphere. Another fantastic dyslexic art. Thank you, Stone. So he only sees the front of my face, and he's trying to hit it. But what I see is so much larger. And when he grabs a hold of me, I can see the tension in his arm shifting. So it's not so much sight. It has nothing to do with my eyes. It's more of Stone, will you pass this, give this out to the rest of the audience so that they can play with it? You're allowed to play with toys in this speech. Thank you, Stone. So it's not that we see it, it's just that our nervous system feels a signal of it that's rich. The robustness of that information allows us to see things in a strange light. And I remember, I got involved with martial arts. It's a very long story. But this is from the Toronto Sun. The front page photo is of me almost dying. From 1993 World Games, which is like the university for Olympic athletes. And at the time, I had 2 years of college martial art club. It was an intramural club. 2 nights a week after classes, we'd go and we'd grapple, and then we'd go back to study, most of us. The guy whose butt you see is the Soviet champion of Greco-Roman wrestling, the Soviet champion of judo, and the Soviet champion of my sport, sambo. And I'm in the final round with him for the gold medal. He was like a magician. He'd move in, and he'd grab a hold of me, and for most people, when they would grab a hold of me, it was very slow. But for him, I could see the whoosh, whoosh, in come his body, and he's trying to throw me, and whoa, and it was mostly escape and evasion, just like this. He entered into this beautiful hip throw, and for most athletes, that's it. Once the throw begins, you're done. For me, because of my dyslexia, I've felt the problem happening, and everybody in the audience says, oh, he's gonna die. And I reach out, and you can see my thought process. This is why I love this photo. It was embarrassing at the time. It was before my dyslexic coming out phase. But I'm reaching out, and I cartwheeled out of the throw. My opponent was walking off the mat because he thought, American is dead. And he turns around, and he was a little upset because I'm standing there, and I'm looking at myself like, I'm not dead. And the audience goes, rah! They stood up, he's not dead. But it was because of that information, I had 400 to 2,000 times more options of experience that were happening in my body. So I had more data of what was happening. And it creates a distortion in time. The more slices of time that you have, the slower time gets. So when you really enjoy something and you lose time, everybody's experienced that. You're not aware of the clock anymore. Holy smokes, I'm not aware of the clock anymore. That creates a difference between what you experience at the time and what I experience. That time warp is interesting. So I remember the first time that I experienced that, I didn't know that would play as a video. We'll do that again. Cool, I didn't know that would do that. I was watching a movie, it's not appropriate for all ages, but it was called The Matrix, and there was a point in it where the bad guys were seen by the good guy, dyslexic, for what they were, just lines of information. I had gotten back from Russia, I was studying biomechanics and stress physiology there, and suddenly the stuff that I was studying now explained what I was experiencing. This was the double cool thing. Now I understood what was going on with me, and I could do it consciously. So when we were out grappling one day, my team was grabbing a hold of me, and as soon as they touched me, I could see the lines of force inside their bodies. This was, I had broken the code on what I was already experiencing. So I need Caleb again. Can you hand me the buckyballs? So I'm going to let you have one, and I'm going to play with one. This was actually the first toy that I had as a kid. I want to do that one more time. So I gave this to my son to chew on. It's not the same one. Don't worry. You don't have. It's not a pre-chewed buckyball. These are new ones. And I gave one to my daughter as well. But what's cool is Buckminster Fuller was an architect and a dyslexic who looked at architecture and saw that if I could make the hard compressive struts float inside this sea of continuous tension, then I could make more efficient structure that could resist earthquakes. And he created really an intricate architecture like the geodesic dome. Instead of trying to fight the pre-existing model, he created a new one and replaced what we had previously understood. My teacher was a man named Dr. Stephen Levine who studied with Buckminster Fuller. He applied this to biology, and it's called Biotensegrity. And the cool thing is, this is what our cell structure is like. Our cells like this. It has this sea of continuous tension that these hard stuff float in. And it applies to the physical body. These are like bones, and this is like connective tissue. When I was a kid, I was taught there was something called a musculoskeletal system, that muscles move bone. It's a big lie. Muscles don't touch bone. There's no muscle in your body that touches a bone. One of my teachers once said that science is a very convincing set of lies. The great thing is that it's more convincing than the prior set. The bad thing is that once we believe things to be a certain way, we don't look for greater options or better explanations. Biotensegrity explains that there's all of this connective tissue that holds these compressive struts, and that the more that it forms around it, the more that we can move elastically. That allows us to be graceful. So in exercise, I'd see somebody trying to do an exercise, and I could see the knot of tension from a prior injury, or the stress from their day, or the trauma that they experienced, and okay, we're going to stop doing that technique. Just let's do this for a second. And I could release that excess tension and put them back into the exercise. When I had a joint disease as a kid, this was critical for me to apply my dyslexia to my joint disease so that I could figure out a way to exercise that wouldn't leave me in agony. And I figured out how to use that as a tool, because that sight of having 400 to 2,000 times more options allowed me to see things in a different light. I also had to study. That was the hard part. My handwriting is still a mess. This is a page from one of my journals. But there's a certain elegance to that mess, right? There's a certain mad genius to it. There's weird things going on. And if you let me have my stuff, right? If you let me have my accommodations and my things, then everything goes really well. I make very distant connections. But if I don't have my tools and you put me in a particular environment, and I want to say this to all the dyslexics out there, we can still do it. If you make me speak in 13 minutes with punishment as the consequence, I'm still going to do it. I'm going to create my own strategies to achieve it. But I need allies. I need my my support system for my family, and I need to understand that I'm going to have anxious outbreaks. Like I'm going to go to the bathroom 8 times before my presentation, and that happens. That's my anxiety. I've never gotten any better at public speaking. But the point is that I can still do it. It's just a lot more difficult internally. It causes me a great deal of stress. So for the dyslexics, we can still do it. It's just we're going to feel challenged. But if you take your tools and your strategies and let your teachers help you with creating accommodations, that's their phrase for it. Accommodations, the things that make you feel comfortable and help you throw your big ideas across your brain, then you're going to go faster. Why? Because those 400 to 2,000 times more options let you come up with even faster ideas, bigger ideas. And they're going to rely upon you one day. They're going to come to you and say, okay, we have this problem. We have these solutions, but they're not working. I'll take a look. I want to go through this really quick before I get pulled off stage. There was the greatest philosopher in Western thought, Socrates, was a dyslexic. If you wanted to study with Socrates, you had to walk around the Parthenon with him every morning. That's the only way he would teach you, is through physical exercise. And he didn't like to write, and he didn't like to read. So when you walked with him, you had to do the writing. And his student, Plato, had to follow him around. Yes, 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 yes. And he'd walk around the Parthenon exercising with him. Exercise was his accommodation, like was mine. His student, Aristotle, took those dyslexic tools and made them into some of the most significant political and social constructs we have. All of our societies based upon Aristotelian thought. The cool thing about Aristotle is that King David came to him and said, look, my son, he's just this troubled kid. He can't do anything that I tell him to do, and the more I force him to do it, the more he backs away and pretends he doesn't know what he's doing. And Aristotle was like, well, it sounds familiar. My grand teacher was like that. So I'm going to teach him the same thing that my teacher and his teacher taught him. There's a little boy named Alexander. When he taught him these 5 things, that little Alexander became Alexander the Great, one of the most significant dyslexics in history, who changed the course of what we understand of the world. He brought with him architects and mathematicians. Yes, people talk about him being a conqueror, but he left in place builders of society. Pavpo, I like to remember things in acronyms, is what he taught little Alexander. The first is, everybody talks about keeping a positive perspective. That doesn't mean anything to dyslexics. It doesn't. Yes, we know. We understand. You're very positive. Thank you. What we need to understand about being positive is that the thing that we're experiencing negative is the thing we need to concentrate on. So when we see something that's the problem, it's the inverse that is the genius of it, the mirror image that is the genius of it. We have to see not this thing that's shaped the wrong way, but see it from a different angle to see, that's how that could be a useful advantage. So when we experience a problem, like my mirror writing, I need to look at, why do I have 400 to 2,000 times more options available to me, rather than 400 to 2,000 times slower? When you find those advantages, make them your allies. Create your own strategies for achieving things. That's what we have to work on. So if I have this slower delay time, how can I use that to advantage? One, I can just speak like William Shatner and be more dramatic. And I sit here and I let you suffer with my pauses. I don't try and fill it with noise, not ums and ahs and ohs and you thinks and you knows. I hold those back and I let you have to carry the burden for that. I look at that as an advantage because that draws in the audience. There are different problems that manifest, but we can make them our buddies. You're going to find your own way to express this. And once you do, it's going to take courage. It's not going to be easy to stand up. It's going to cause us anxiety to do it. I'm glad the bathroom's very close. Every time that that's the first thing I scout out. Food, bathroom. And understanding that I'm going to have those eruptions of anxiety, I'm still going to try and find my own way to express it, even when I feel like an alien, even when I feel like an outsider. I want you, dyslexics, to find your own way to achieve it. You're going to be placed, you're not going to have these awesome people around you all the time. Sometime you're going to have them behind you even when they're not. They're going to be with you, supporting you, but you're going to be standing alone to do it. When you do, realize one day that courage that you're showing right now is going to change what you're doing. Because those big ideas that you're throwing across shift their perspective. They can't go back to thinking the other way, like Oliver Wendell Holmes said. It won't go back to its original dimensions. You will have changed the way they think just by standing up. You're going to have your own process, like I went to bed at 8:30. I rehearsed twice. I know because I was off because of not having sleep in the plane, and I didn't have my food optimized, so I bring an extra bag just of food. And I have to have all my things set up, and we check the mic, and then we had the problem with, I usually have a slide advance from my phone, so I can see the future slide. I'm like, I'll advance the slide now. Cheating, looking down at my next slide and knowing what's happening. But that didn't happen here today, so I had a monkey wrench. So I went outside, I did some of my exhale breathing, I came back in, I said, okay, that's what I have to do, so I have to accommodate it this way. There are things that are going to happen, and you have to have your own process, and you have to have emergency plans. So when things go wrong, what is your first backup plan? When it goes wrong, not if it goes wrong. Do not give a perfect, ideal situation to a dyslexic. Give them backup plans. Here's what I need to do. My son had Velcro under his desk. He came to me the other day. He had failed a reading test. That's what he was told. He had failed the reading test. And he came back and he said, Dad, what do we need to do to pass this test? 1, son, you're awesome. You said we. 2, okay, let's come up with our own way to beat this test. And we did. We sat down and we had a strategy. And by the end, he goes, oh, I'm so going to beat this test. And that's what we have to do. It's not, we have to stop associating ourselves with the problem. We're not the problem. The test is the problem. We're just going to find our own process to beat it. If teachers are given the option to give us some leeway in those tests, like the time compression thing, this is awful, or surprise tests, like give us a test, sample test the night before, and we will destroy the test the next day. But there's some things that we have to switch around. You can make it easier on us, but still, even if nothing gets easier, we can sit down and we can figure out our own process to achieve the same end. It just takes us some work. Finally, organize your environment in your own way. Set it up so it's optimal for you. It'll look like a mess to other people. My wife, she's brilliant and she's wonderful, and she comes into my office and messes with my stuff. She thinks this will be much neater. I'm like, I don't need neat. I need this. I need it to be set up this way. She's going to kill me if she sees this video. So I need things to be set up in my way. And if that makes me feel confident and comfortable, let me have it. It'll happen. And that mess has a certain elegance to it. I put it in my grid cells. Now I know where these things are. So it may be friends, it may be family, it may be siblings, it may be an area or a pet, but you want to develop your think tank. I know, my dog is my best friend. And because of that, we have conversations. And she doesn't respond yet, but she'll sit there and she's so attentive. Like she thinks everything I say is interesting. So once you expand that think tank, you can have different perspectives on the same thing. I love when my business partner is a non-dyslexic. He's very detail-oriented. And he comes to me, he's like, Scott, So we must understand this point. In this sentence on word 3 at paragraph 6, I destroy editors. I make them cry. I've gone through editor after, and then they finally they quit their business and they never go back to editing. And my partner, he sets it up so that we don't lose more editors. So he goes through and he explains it, and I try and look at it. I'm like, no, I still don't see it. I was like, Scott, look more closely. I look closer, still don't get it. If for him to be with me, we have a balance, right? The non-dyslexic and the dyslexic, we can work together, and he gives me the perspective. He's the very detail-oriented, and I'm the big picture. And without both, we don't produce the things that we do in our company. Together, it's monstrous. And the more that we have it's not just dyslexics and non-dyslexics. The world's not built of that. The world's built of different learning styles. And when you combine all of those learning styles together, you create awesome stuff. That's the technical term for it. That's my daughter. She's interpersonal. She learns by talking. Oh. And she's musical rhythmic. So she learns by dancing in the same floor that my office is. So I'm intrapersonal. I learn by thinking about something. And I'm kinesthetic, so I feel everything that happens. So while she's dancing up there and talking out loud about her homework, singing her way through her lesson, I'm trying to focus on my writing. I'm like, sweetheart, we have to do something. We have to learn how to, can you do this song because I like this song? Or we alternate times. Within a household, we have to figure out what the group dynamic is. And you can't put your foot on somebody else's learning style in order to tell your own. Be proud of your story. And if you feel like you're being pushed down, look at that for what it is and tell your story anyway. It doesn't feel like a point of pride sometimes, especially in school. I mean, I know you guys are trying to build this up, and you're trying to show other kids what it's like, but kids are kids. And adults, we only have the impression that we were given and we were taught, so it takes us time. The best thing that you could do for us is allow us the opportunity to fail. Let us stand up and feel awful. We won't ever feel good about doing it. We have to stand up and be on our own and experience it, and then we realize, okay, so this is what I'm like. And then suddenly, like the whole classroom with Mrs. Peterman, and they all ran over to see me writing Tox No-Nos and Scott Sonnon at the same time, the other kids get a chance to see how cool that is. If you give us the opportunity to stand up, if you give us the chance to show our courage, I promise you, everyone is going to be changed by it. Thank you.
So that must be motivation then? I mean, your motivation to accomplish that goal? Because it has to be intrinsic.
Knowledge for me is a bridge. So I'm trying, okay, if I have this gap between these two buckyballs, the first thing is, I know that I'm not going to find the right book or the right article first. It's probably the last book and the last article. It always is the last book and the last article, right? Is it? That was silly. So if I want to create that bridge, I've got to expect, okay, I'm not going to get it right at first. But, and this is the problem, we need to feel the success before we have it. We have to create the impression or the experience of success before we have to experience failure in the same thing. And that's what I mean by pretest. So I go through and I find a book and I pick up the book and I start reading it. Read. Meh. Sometimes I'll get through the whole book and realize it's not the one that I need to get from this point to this point. I need to make this distant connection, but my brain hasn't figured it out yet, and there's this lag time. Whereas I know as a dyslexic, for the non-dyslexic, this is going to sound so arrogant. I'm sorry. I know as a dyslexic, I'm going to figure things out that other people won't. But I have to put data into my brain to come up with that distant connection. So for instance, I had a joint disease as a kid, and I couldn't exercise in the way most people did. So if I lifted weights, it would shred my connective tissue, and I'd be left in this like corset of agony, and my mom would have to rub me down with liniment every night because my connective tissue would pull up. So this frustrated me, and I'm looking at the problem, and I'm trying to figure out, well, why is that happening? And then I happened to see, I was reading a book about medicine, seeing that doctors put bones in traction to make them heal. And something about that problem didn't make sense. How can they pull things apart to make them come together? That doesn't make sense. So that problem, that investigation became a hypothesis. They're making it heal by pulling it apart. And I happened to be in not Tajikistan, I was in Lithuania, and I saw the team from Tajikistan swinging these huge wooden lollipops. And my brain stopped, and I got thrown because I saw them while I was in the middle of things, and I got tossed, and I lost. But I walked off the mat, and I walked over to the team from Tajikistan, and I thought, what are you doing? They were swinging weight. They were causing their tissue to pull apart. If they're pulling their tissue apart, that should make me stronger because it'll heal by pulling. So I could do the same thing that bones. So I started researching, okay, I need to understand tractional tissues. And like the words mean nothing. I need to figure out how to get, and I ended up creating tools through that research. But I went through many books, lots of frustration. The problem isn't how awesome our brain is. The problem is the lack of confidence in going with those crazy ideas. Like, you just have to run with them. And when you're a kid and then everybody else is doing things a completely different way, you think, well, I must be wrong because I'm in the minority. Sometimes only the minority is right. And you have to look at the majority and you have to, wait, if most people are thinking this way, then there must be something wrong. That's what you have to, the shift that you have to make when it comes to education. When I'm looking at a book, okay, if I want to come up with this idea, I'm going to have to expect to go against the grain. And even my own grain, knowing, here we go. I'm going to open this book. I'm going to do my best to find what I need as fast as possible. And that's like going through it. And I try and gloss through. I let my brain go on tangents. And that's the hard thing when the education is so directed. You have to stay on task. But my task is going to go around the world to get across the block. And it takes me not longer, but I've conjoined so many other things along the way that when I get back here, I'm like, I'm going to show you this. And this is really cool. So it's never gotten any easier. It's still an awful experience. Parents are going to hate me for saying this. I hate books. It's just such an awful way to put information. Like, just come on. So, but knowing that, all right, I got to get out of this book what I want. So I'm going to open the book up. I need to connect these 2 points, and I need to find out what the author is thinking. So I've got to go in here, and I got to get by all his insecurities and all his wanting to prove himself and all these superfluous details. Okay, that's what he's saying. That's what I want. And once I get there, then it's easy. But I have to go against the grain of even the whole thing about books are wonderful, reading's awesome. Reading helps me find my great ideas. It's a tool. It's not an activity. It's not pleasant. But I need that tool. I need that thing. That will help me come between these 2 points. So I feel it, a lot of dyslexics like me feel a lot of pressure when everybody talks about how enjoyable reading is and how wonderful it is. It's like sparring. I don't like sparring, but I want to know how to defend myself, right? Being hit in the face is not fun. But if I practice this thing, then I'll know how to not get hit. And that's what I really want. So I've got to go into that awful experience and figure out my own strategies. Okay, I'm not going to read this and let people tell me I need to understand it. I'm going to read this and accept that most of it's going to wash out, and I'm going to find out what I want from it and create my ideas from it. So that's the real point. I'm going to find out what's inside this book rather than such a wonderful activity. It hasn't gotten any better. Sorry, ma'am?
Well, okay, so in school, dyslexics are all you are made to realize that you are different. And
Right.
so, and to a dyslexics, all you see time and time again are weakness, 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 weakness. Okay, so as a parent or a teacher, how do you take those dyslexics and not put them in a box of dyslexics, and how do you help them find their own individual strengths when just because I'm a dyslexic and that girl over there is dyslexic doesn't mean my strengths are going to be the same, so I can't treat them the same either?
Because the world isn't composed of dyslexics and non-dyslexics. I'm not a fan of the term because all we're talking about is a non-thing. In logic class, we're not talking about B, we're talking about not A. That's what dyslexic means. It's not A. It's difficulty with language. Okay, that's what I'm not. I'm not good with language, but what am I? So if we talk about it and learning styles isn't even an effective term because we don't have a learning style. We're more like a dial. So we have all of these different learning styles, and sometimes the opposite learning style is on the bottom from what people are focused on. Like, let's put verbal linguistic on the bottom for me, when they want it to be the thing that we should be dialed into. But I have all of these adjacent learning styles. So I have like kinesthetic and spatial. So I look at the page, and I look at how it's mapped out, and I memorize where the words are placed. I'm not reading it. I'm looking at it for later reference so I can draw from it. Kinesthetically, I have to write it out. I write out what I'm thinking about the page. And one of the best tools that one of my teachers gave me was, I want you to write an original statement on the side of each page from something that you figured out from that page. Everybody else thought this was an awful experience. And I asked, like, so anything I want, I'm disqualified. I can write anything I want. Yes, anything you want. It's an original thought. Anything. Yes. Awesome. So I first started, sometimes it's a doodle, sometimes. Fernet Ide, in the book A Dyslexic Advantage, wrote, a toy is not just a toy, and a doodle is not just a scribble. We're figuring things out because we think in images. So if I can make an image of what I'm experiencing, I'm learning. When there's such a diversity of it, we have to realize that there's a dynamic that's different. I'm not going to expect anyone to be the same as me. This is the difficult part. One, I'm not a dyslexic educator. I'm just a dyslexic. Two, I don't have to work in classrooms. I work with classrooms. And there's a difference as a speaker and a coach. So I have a different job. It's a very difficult job for one or two teachers to have a classroom of all individuals. The truth is that there aren't 4/5 that are non-dyslexic. One, they're sleeper cells. Most of us are stealth dyslexics. We've figured out very fast accommodations in our brains in order to not look like we have difficulty with language. It's not 4/5. It's much larger percentage than we think. Two, the range of learning styles is different. So when we say dyslexic, we think category. The only category is these people have difficulty with language to the point that the classroom needs to allocate them extra conditions. And that's a truth because we haven't changed the format of the classroom yet. That'll change. It will change. As we change what the accommodations are, our classrooms will expand in their concept. Because the idea of a classroom is just an idea. It's not a thing. And it's changed over time. So once we start giving this 20% of students allocation of extra time, like time compression crushes me, of required verbatim rehearsal. That's awful. Rote memory. It's like that I don't have that. I have to do it a different way. And then finally, that the consequences have to be different. The consequences have to be organized on successfully failing rather than succeeding or failing. And so I have to do something, and I have to get through all of the wrong book choices to find what I want. And that's successfully failing. So there's a massive array of diverse individuals in the classroom. I'm trying to figure out what their superpower is. It's not always easy when the administration is looming over a teacher, saying, no, you must teach this master curriculum. That you want your job? It's extortion. So we have to continue to work with the advocates for educational reform, because once you change 20%, the whole classroom concept's going to fall down, and we're going to improve the whole thing. So it's, one, you got to create the lifeboat for your individual child. Like with my son, I'm looking at, okay, as long as I can keep his confidence intact, when he experiences what people are telling him are failure, and he looks at them like, I'm not a failure. I didn't succeed at your test. That's a completely flipped concept. It's not internalized. If we can create that lifeboat, they will figure it out. You don't have to worry about us. But the rest of the diversity of kids and the things that we experience with the teachers, the best thing that we could do is just be present. Like my wife, she smiles. She's good at that. She smiles and says, I can see that this is happening, and I can see the disparity between these two tests, and they're the exact same tests, but the scores are different. How do you think we can resolve this disparity? How can we work together? And she's very diplomatic. I sit there quietly with no expression on my face. That's how I help facilitate change. So we work together, good cop and bad cop. But being present really helps, and you're already doing that. My mother advocated for me in the time when I was called mentally ill. That was really hard for her. And because of my dyslexia, put into a mental hospital, isolated away from everyone. But her advocacy, even though none of the specific things that she did were the things that glommed on for me and became learning styles, it was one thing that she was doing. She was practicing martial art because she was being abused, and she defended herself. It was seeing her advocate for me that made the difference. And that's the most important thing, is parents, you just need to realize that everything that you're doing is working. It just takes longer. It's not immediate where we're like, I'm now confident. I'm going to take a lot longer to figure out my confidence. And teachers, just because not in your school year do you see the blossoming, don't worry. It's coming. It just takes longer. I know it's a long in the tooth explanation, but it's not I don't have a simple answer. I do know what you're doing is working.
Yeah, so my next question then is, for students who are currently dealing with what you mentioned earlier about the anxiety that they have, oftentimes they're experience that to the point that it's so severe that they can't communicate what they need. And what would you suggest, or what would be your advice to those students to start attacking that particular issue rather than just the reading?
I'm laughing, I'm smiling because I'm trying to restrain myself from saying my first answer. My first answer is they need to scream. They really do. Because you can't get too calm. You have to work your way there. So you can't get to yoga breathing when you're being shot at, is what I tell the federal government when I'm working with them. Because they want me to come in and teach resilience and how to recover from extreme stress. And when I come in and teach a yoga class, well, I guess, no, nobody's going to do yoga when they're being shot at. You have to work your way there. So the first thing that happens with panic is, And maybe not that dramatic. That's shock, panic. But frustration is pressurized breathing. So if ah! Oh. I took it off the mic. And everybody outside is like, oh, I don't want to do that breakout workshop. So you can't, in the classroom, encourage screaming because of the disruption that will happen to the rest of the class. But, especially in schools that are removing recess, you're removing their ability to scream and be loud. Those moments have to happen. So if you can't have volume disrupting others, then we have to work on ways to get them to exhale. My wife teaches horse breath. So he still does it. She started with my daughter, but my son, he still does it even when he's on the soccer field. He's running and he gets anxious because he thinks he's not performing like a professional soccer player at 9 years old. So I'll see him doing his horse breath. And that's the first step, because this is not pseudoscience, it's hard science. Exhale is directly connected to the parasympathetic nervous system. So when I exhale, my heart rate drops. Inhale is connected to the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight. So when I inhale, my heart rate spikes. And if I inhale and get my heart rate going, I can cause the whole biochemical cocktail in my bloodstream and get more anxiety. So I can actually make the situation worse by doing this. Yes, the pressurizing is what causes the hormones to release. Exhale is the rest and recover reflex. So when I hate bumper stickers that say just breathe, because people just breathe in the pattern they've been doing. Just breathe. Stop working. Just exhale. So we start with making it playful. And I don't mind getting the entire class up for 5 seconds to do something silly, because every kid's going to benefit from that reprieve in concentration and lowering their heart rate. There's a direct correlation between reading comprehension and decrease and exhalation. It's a study that we did in psychophysiology at Millersville University in 2001. It was published, and we did it in 1997 is when we did 1998 is when we did the research, but it was finally published 4 years later, because no, that breathing voodoo, that doesn't work. It's a hard science. It took us a long time to catch up. You have to be creative about it. But you can be creative about you can get them all standing up and singing. You can have a moment where everybody whistles. You can have a moment where you pass out straws and you play a game of pushing a paper football across their desk. I am not above bribery. I will do anything to get them to exhale and decrease their heart rate. They don't need to know a word about anything about the nervous system. But I know that if I get their chemistry down, then the anxiety comes off. You can't be anxious and have deep exhales. It's the polar opposite. I should qualify that. If you have an anxiety disorder, then you need remedial help from a chemical standpoint. I'm not talking about if you have a chemical challenge. There's some other problems. But for a dyslexic or for learning difficulties, as we exhale, we increase what we understand. So my wife will walk into the office and I'll have a big sigh, and she's like, "What? I wasn't going to ask you anything. I wasn't going to ask you to do anything." I'm like, "No, sweetie, I'm not sighing at you. I'm not exasperated. I'm exhaling because I can't figure out this word, psychoneuroimmunology. Chop it into parts. Just chop it into parts." And then I had to break it up, and then I had to figure out, okay, psychology, brain, my immune system, okay. And I have to go through all my process. But all right, I'll figure it out. So that's the first step, exhale. Holy smokes, I'm really long in the race. Sorry about that. I can't see hands, so you can just speak, please.
You kind of have to detect their, I guess you have to detect their anxiety before they have it, because I'm thinking if they are in such a overwhelmed state that even suggesting let's do something silly and stand up, they're going to be beyond that. So how?
Okay, so the thing about learning difficulties is that we have a lot of coping skills, and one of them is that we are good at hiding from you in plain sight. So we will sit there and we'll make it look like nothing's wrong. Oh, everything's fine. My son's good at this. No, Dad, it's fine. It's fine means it's not. I get the translation. So you might not see how anxiety manifests. You might not see us holding our breath. You might not see us red in the face. We're really good at hiding it. I'm good at hiding it right now, being on stage. We're going to have anxiety. Why? Anxiety is good. Let me say that again. Anxiety is a good thing. If we have butterflies in our stomach, if we have GI issues and we have appetite suppression and all of those things, those are natural ramp-ups for the body to prepare for something that is perceived as challenging. We do not want to remove challenges. You're going to feel those things when you go into a sport, when you want to, when you're older, ask a girl or a boy out. You're going to have all of those anxieties for the rest of your life. The goal isn't to remove anxiety. The goal is to have tools to deal with the anxiety when it happens. So we want to have anxiety management, not anxiety removal. If they're anxious, what tools can we give them? Can I have a drink of water? Can I go to the bathroom? Can I exhale? Can I spend a minute to doodle? Can I just stand outside the hall for a second? Because I get overstimulated by too many people talking or too many different noises. So I've got to remove the stim just for a second before I go back in. Bathrooms are my sacred place. Even if it's a hotel bathroom, I got to get away for a second. I got to close the door, and I'll put on earbuds just so that I can tune out all stim from external people, because my brain is constantly trying to pull in data. And if I can remove that for a second, there is recovery that allows me to focus. So first, how do I deal with managing my anxiety? And then two, then I can look at the problem and create an ally from my advantages. How can I use my advantages to create the solution that the teacher wants to see? And that's another focus. It's a shift. This is not the right answer. This is the one you want. And that's a big difference. One of my coaches said, there are many wrong ways to do something. There are many right ways to do something. And then there's the way we're going to do it. I'm like, okay, so I just have to do it the way that you want to do it. Fine. It's not the right way to do it, and that's a judgment on me. Well, I am not right. Like, I am wrong. That's a judgment. A judgment-free zone is, okay, I just have to figure out which way that you want this to be. And that sometimes teachers don't articulate that. They can't articulate it. They're young, and they're really passionate about being educators, and they forget that they're also receivers, right? They want to fill the brains. My brain is full. All you're doing is helping connections. And that's a different mindset. So just, this is the pattern in my brain you want to see repeated. Okay, I'll help you create that pattern. I'm sorry I didn't get to a lot of questions, but you have to be prepared for a long answer.